topics that are important to them. My name is Nabillah, and I'm joined with a panel of 6 people today, 6 young people, mashallah. You've heard some of their voices before in previous shows, and I am absolutely thrilled that they're joining us again. Alhamdulillah, they've done an incredible job sharing their views, and also a real credit to the parents that have encouraged them to come on this show. Just in a short space of time, they've built up so much more confidence and skills, and I'd encourage other parents who are listening to do the same and use the opportunity, a local volunteering opportunity, to get more young people involved in the radio show. So quick introduction. Today we have got Kaleem. Assalamu alaikum, Kaleem. How are you?
Alaikum assalam. I'm good, alhamdulillah. You?
Alhamdulillah, not too bad. Bashira, how are you?
I'm okay, alhamdulillah.
Good. Thank you for joining us again. Sana, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Dahir, assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Alaikum assalam. I'm good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, good. So last week, Kaleem and Dahir came on the first time. They did an incredible job. And today we've got Maryam, who is another new young person joining the conversation. Assalamu alaikum, Maryam.
Alaikum salam.
How are you? Oh, alhamdulillah, you got there before me. Alhamdulillah, good. So, again, we haven't got much time, but let's crack on, do the best we can. And as always, really appreciate your honest answers and just joining the conversation, I guess. I'm going to pass on to Amira, who is in the studio with us. Amira's going to give us an update, an overview, should I say, of the topic today.
Okay, so today we're going to discuss the issue of gender equality and explore specifically how stereotypes can play a role in creating differences in how the genders are treated. Now, sometimes this is happening subconsciously, and we might not be aware that we are acting out some stereotypes or reinforcing them, and this can result in a harmful or unhealthy behaviours and attitudes in the future. Sometimes we see these stereotypes being unintentionally reinforced by the people closest to us, including family and friends. Looking at the long-term impact of this, it is concerning. Even in this modern day and age, women are treated unfairly in the world of work, experiencing lower pay across a number of roles. This is very much a global issue. Bringing it more closer to home, stereotypes can affect how marriages function, how children are raised, and relationships with those around us are formed. Add to this cultural norms and expectations, and now we have a very complex mix of how young Muslims interpret gender equality from a faith perspective. These factors often distort the reality that Islam liberated women in so many ways, and in the same breath reminded men through the example and teachings of the Prophet ﷺ the harms of toxic masculinity. We are equal in front of Allah, but sometimes our lived experiences may be further from this truth. This is a big topic, and we have a short time to cover this, but as always, we would love to hear from our listeners, young and old inshallah, throughout the show. You can text or WhatsApp by messaging the following number, 0774 88 55 055, or connect with us via our live streams going out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube.
Hey, well done, mashallah. Well, look, that's a big topic. You've sort of just touched on some of the things we're going to be speaking about today, and I really hope the listeners engage with the show. I can't stress enough how valuable it is when we have the comments coming through, and how much it empowers the young people that are here contributing to the show. So let's kick off the conversation. Obviously, Mira mentioned about stereotypes. We're really going to focus on how stereotypes can lead to boys and girls being treated differently, and how that can continue in adult life. So, as usual, we're going to kickstart with some conversations. And Amira, you're in the studio today, so we'll start with you. Let's talk about exploring stereotypes, okay? How would you define the word stereotype?
I think stereotype is the association of a behavior or an attitude or a type of person with someone that you see, just based off how you've seen other people associated with that person, and that kind of thing, yeah. Okay.
Maryam, so when you're thinking about the word stereotype, let's think specifically about gender stereotype. How do you define that?
For me, a gender stereotype is something that has been created by both society and like your family and your friends and the media about how a particular gender should act. So like how girls should act and how boys should act. For example, like girls being caring and boys being strong. Like those are the kind of stereotypes that are created.
Brilliant. Okay, so
for
there's a couple
boys.
of examples there: boys being strong, and girls being caring. So, Dahir, can you think of other sort of typical examples when it comes to gender stereotypes?
I think one main one would be that men don't cry, because they don't really show their emotions. And I think it also links to mental health when you talk about how people can be scared to share their emotions. If men cry, people around them may just say, "Oh, man up," that kind of thing.
Okay. So yeah, there's always a response to these, isn't it? If you don't adhere to these like stereotypical norms, I guess, it can be quite a difficult thing to be on the receiving end of some of these comments. Galeem, do you want to add to that? Any sort of stereotypes that you can think of, typical examples?
Yeah, in so like a career aspect, women are expected or like seen to have taken like more maternal roles and jobs, such as like being nurses or anything to do with like children. So like childcare. It's like when you think of it, you think of like women are in those roles.
Wow. Yeah, and again, it's great that you guys are picking up on this. I imagine you do have these kind of conversations in school lessons, and you know, can really unpick it with your teachers that this stuff is historic, you know, and we're still dealing with it, despite small efforts to try and change that. So, Bashira, then, we're talking about boys, and obviously there's been examples there about being strong. From a girl's point of view, then, what does it mean to act like a man? What kind of words or expectations come to your mind?
Well, see, for me personally, I hate the term like man up because I feel like that invalidates like men's feelings.
Yeah.
But if you're like getting like, you know, with the like stereotypical view of like telling people to man up, like saying like Tahir said, like men don't cry, you know, men need to be strong, men need to go out and work and like fend for the family, be the breadwinner, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Okay, Sana, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think I was just going to say what Bashira said about men being the breadwinners of the family. So everything I think has been touched on.
Brilliant. So I'm going to keep you on then. Okay, so let's think about women. What does it mean to be ladylike?
Being gracious, being quiet, kind of being toned down about your opinions, always having like a man or someone that's just protecting you, that kind of thing.
Okay. Amira, what about you? What does it mean to be ladylike?
I think be polite, speak when it's your turn, like you kind of just, make food for people, like you stay at home, look after the kids. That's being ladylike.
Okay. Honestly, and we laugh, but these are really lived experiences of some people. So, it's really important that we continue discussing this and not trivialize it because it's a big issue. So, Mariam, then, if we were to think about sort of being ladylike, can you think of anything else that you want to add to that?
I think being ladylike is kind of being emotional and being able to portray your emotions. Some people could say that ladies are more emotional than men, and when men kind of start to show their emotions by crying or like just getting upset over things, it's kind of seen as a feminine thing instead of something that obviously everybody experiences emotions, but it's more ladylike to be in touch with your emotions and to portray your emotions on other people.
Yeah, and this is it. The reality of stereotypes is that it's actually an overly simple picture or an opinion of a person or group or thing, and a lot of it is around things that we can visibly see. So with like men and women, obviously they look different, and off the back of that, before you even had a chance to have a conversation with someone, you might already have made assumptions about them because they are a woman or they are a man. Okay, and I think there's an argument to be made that both sides encounter that at some point in their lives, and obviously there's definitely some impact. When boys are being told, "Don't cry, man up," boys don't cry, that kind of thing. There's definitely something in that can translate into something that's much more difficult and harmful sometimes. Okay, so Amira then, so typically where do girls and boys learn these stereotypes? Mariam did mention this, she touched on a few things, but can you think of anything else where stereotypes are initially introduced to us?
I think at home they can obviously, like I said earlier, can be unintentionally introduced. Like you see your mum cooking in the kitchen more than you see your dad cooking. Women wear makeup. You go outside and women are wearing makeup. If she's wearing too much, she's a catfish. If she's not wearing enough, she needs more because she's not pretty.
Right.
Again, when we go like all over social media as well, we're showing we have to dress a certain way, look a certain way, to be a certain way, and I think that's also a very difficult. Very difficult thing to keep up with.
Galeem, what about you? Sort of a male perspective, if you can bring that in. Where are these stereotypes coming from?
So a lot of stereotypes come from school. So if you think about like primary school, you see that teachers are mainly female, whereas like the person in charge and the head teacher is often a man.
Yeah.
There's also like I went over the world of work, and again for men though this time, boys are expected to take like more physical and technical jobs like DIY electricians and mechanics and things like that, whereas girls aren't seen as taking roles like that.
Yeah. Wow. Again, something, it's, again, I keep saying this, but it's always nice to hear so many different perspectives. And I really value like all of you coming on and contributing. Down here, I'm just going to sort of go off the back of what Galeem has said about starting in school. If as a boy, you wanted to do like a non-traditional boy subject, I don't know, food technology or something, how easy is that in this day and age? Has it changed much, or do you still think it's quite difficult?
I think a lot of people tend to follow the crowd nowadays. So no one really goes and chooses food tech. It's more you do what your friends are doing. If you know what I'm trying to say, as in everyone does everything. They just follow each other. Yeah. So if none of your friends are doing food tech, you may be scared to pick food tech, which means that you don't want to do it because you don't know how they react. It just depends on who's the leader and who you're following.
Yeah. So there's definitely a culture in schools that kind of promotes stereotypes. Amira mentioned home environments. So let's talk about that a bit. Mariam, what cultural factors are at play when we think about how parents, sort of extended family or other sort of wider networks treat sort of girls in comparison to boys, or daughters in comparison to their sons? What are the cultural factors at play that young people are exposed to?
I think, like, for example, I'm going to use an example here. If there's like a family dinner or something, the girls are kind of like encouraged to go and clean up after everybody's eaten, or to be in the kitchen, mainly like preparing the food or washing up the dishes or whatever it is, whereas the men are sitting in like the living room just after they've eaten, not really doing anything. That kind of thing. Like if the girls see their aunties and their mums in the kitchen, they're going to go in the kitchen because they haven't seen any other girls sitting with the men. So that's kind of like something that's been like instilled in kids' heads, that like girls belong in the kitchen and boys are like in the living room, and that's something cultural. Like in a lot of ethnic minorities, girls and men have completely different roles.
No, that's a really good example, and I think we witnessed that sort of well later into like adult life. At big family events, women and men have almost very distinct roles, and that's sort of reinforced every time. Bashira, something's telling me, I don't know why, but I feel like you've got something to say on this one, cultural factors and gender stereotypes. Anything you can share with us?
I think that like cultural factors do play a lot into like gender stereotypes, like what Miriam said about the whole like women like go in the kitchen, men just sit and basically do nothing. So yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that.
Okay.
Okay,
I'm just going to sort of extend on that conversation. I think, we typically hear phrases like mummy's boy, he's a mummy's boy, mummy does everything for him. And actually girls are encouraged to get up and get busy and sort of support the family infrastructure. So Galeem, I'm going to go back to you. I apologize, there's only the two of you guys, but it's really important that we get this perspective. Anything else that you can think of in terms of cultural factors that reinforce stereotypes?
It's mostly been over. So girls are expected to be cooking and cleaning, and they're one day expected to be the housewife.
Yeah.
You understand me? So how in our cultures, when a girl gets married, she's expected to leave her house, leave like her friends and like her job and things like that, and go to the in-laws house and look after the in-laws.
Yeah. Wow.
So she's expected to move and leave all of that behind,
Yeah.
whereas the man is just like he could stay at home.
Yeah, yeah. And actually there is that big expectation. You need to get ready to get married, and, you know, obviously you can, you know, do X, Y, and Z. And actually just forgetting the fact that a marriage is a partnership. It involves a man and a woman, you know. And this isn't about, you know, gender bashing at all. We're going to go on to this and hopefully discuss in this a bit more detail, but you know, there's a recognition within Islam that there are some gender roles, if you like. We'll talk about that. But sometimes, you know, some of our very cultural norms can be quite, can be the cause of a lot of issues, particularly within marriages, when the guy just expects to be waited hand and foot and forgets the true Islamic traditions, I guess. Okay, so I just want to remind all the people that are listening, please engage with us. If any of this resonates with you, if you have got any comments or any questions, please text in on 0774 8855 055. Like I said, it's always nice to hear from the listeners, and it makes it feel a bit real that we're not just talking to ourselves. Okay, so moving on then. So the impact of stereotypes. Sana, how do these stereotypes, which result in boys and girls being treated differently, affect young people like you?
I feel like the main place you see it is in schools, because I feel like when there is the stereotype of, let's take the stereotype of men don't cry, men should be tough. If there's always a disagreement between two guys or two cliques of guys in schools, it always ends up in some sort of physical confrontation, which I feel like is a stereotype because men aren't allowed to show their emotions. So by taking it out by like physical confrontation, they're seen as hard in quotations, I guess.
Yeah, and actually that's just taken me back to when I was younger. And if there was a bit of a disagreement between two guys and one of them just decides, okay, I'm just going to deal with this with my fists and get violent because that's what guys do, and the other one naturally will end up in tears because they're just not ready for it, everyone focuses on the guy that's crying and not necessarily the guy that's been unnecessarily violent for no reason, right? And actually, yeah, I guess, you know, we've all kind of been in situations like that where perhaps we have made those broad assumptions about how people should behave. Dahir, have you got anything to add to that? How do these stereotypes result in boys and girls being treated differently? How does that affect young people like you?
I think personally, stereotypes don't really affect me because sometimes I do cry. My sisters take pictures of me crying. It's normal.
Oh dear.
Everyone cries. Everyone gets over it. It's just a thing. It just happens.
Yeah.
You just have to everyone deals with it.
Yeah. And what would happen if you didn't cry? I mean, that would be a lot worse, wouldn't it? How can you imagine that going if you didn't cry it out?
I think if you didn't cry, it's like a pressure tank. It's just pressures building. One day you're going to have to, but it's going to burst out. You're going to end up crying.
Yes.
It's going to have to come out.
Yeah.
Everyone cries.
Yeah. And actually, sometimes you just feel better after it. And I think this links into some of the stuff we talked about last week about mental health and about talking and encouraging talking. You know, there's no distinction that guys can't talk and girls should talk or whatever. And Dahir, well done. Thank you for sharing that. Because I think there are a lot of guys that probably can relate. You know, perhaps they aren't able to do it openly enough for someone to take a photo of them. But the point being, you know, even if they are crying privately, that doesn't mean they're less of a man. Far from the truth, okay? The long-term impacts, I mean, some of the things that we can sort of touch on very briefly is about, you know, how men and women are treated men treat women in a certain way and women treat men in a certain way in their adult lives. You know, we heard a lot around the Me Too movement, was it?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And off the back of that, you know, there is this general feeling amongst those women that women are inferior and men are more superior. They have more control and they can do what they like because the females are the inferior gender. So yeah, there is a long-term impact on this. You know, we've talked about how it can impact marriages and our relationships with people around us, you know, in the working world particularly. You know, and adding to that, being a female Muslim in the working world can present its challenges. We'll touch on how faith comes into the equation. We've got a couple of messages coming through. Amazing show, real wrong one. Salams, culturally, there is an expectation for men to carry out all manual labour work like DIY, etc. Also like getting cars repaired and washed. In turn, because these are mainly male-dominated businesses, so some women feel uncomfortable. Really good discussion. Jazakallah for messaging in. Appreciate that comment. You're right. Actually, there is an expectation that the man in the house will do all of the DIY jobs and sometimes even fill the petrol in the car. You know, that's not to say women are unable to do that, I guess. And I think, you know, when I reflect on sort of my own marriage, I think it's about getting that balance right and not relying on my husband to do everything that I probably could do if I gave it a go, but also recognising that if we do allow ourselves to try new things, there's always something new we'll discover about our potential, whether that you're a man or a woman. Okay, so let's move on then. We're in sort of like the last bit of the show, so time's ticking on. I mentioned about how when you are a Muslim, and you know there's certain perceptions associated with being Muslim just by default. But then if you are a Muslim woman or a Muslim man, there are other things that come into play. Amira, how does the media portray Muslim men and Muslim women?
I think Muslim men can be portrayed as violent or unnecessarily aggressive and oppressive to Muslim women who are the oppressed.
Right.
I say that in quotes because obviously misconception.
Yeah.
But so we're portrayed as we don't really have a voice. We're told what to do by our husbands or our dads or our brothers. We don't really have any freedom ourselves, and that's the portrayal that we get.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually. It obviously comes off the back of a lot of the activities that are linked, terrorist activities that are linked with faith. But also, it just goes to show how powerful the media is in putting out these messages. I still remember when I was on a work meal, and there was someone reputable, a local politician, I'd say, not in Leicester, but we sat at this meal, and he said to me, it was an evening function, and he said to me, "Oh, your husband let you out then?" I'm not making this up. My jaw hit the floor. I was obviously there in a work capacity, very limited in how I could respond. But the reality is that these perceptions exist, and actually, you know, we can't underestimate sometimes people who are very educated still have and carry these stereotypes with them. What we do recognise is that a lot of young people consciously reject these stereotypes. You've made a point that actually, I'm doing this in inverted commas, you know, we're not oppressed, right? You are consciously rejecting it. But what you don't have control over is how that will still affect you in your life. You're not going to shake that away. Just because you don't believe it doesn't mean other people are going to stop believing it. With that said, it's really important that you don't live up to it. It doesn't become the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So, okay, so Dahir, anything else that you want to add on that about how the media portrays Muslim men and Muslim women?
No, I think it's all been covered from what's been talked about.
Lovely.
I don't really have anything to add.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Galeem, I'm going to ask you this question. What is your understanding of gender roles in Islam?
Okay, so I think that like men and women do have particular roles in Islam, but they are very, very equal. And they don't like conform to like current society's like perceptions and their norms. For example, like Sayyidina Khadija radiallahu anha was a very successful businesswoman, and it shows that women can also be the breadwinner. It's not just always the man. Yeah.
Lovely. We've had a comment come through. My daughter, 6-year-old, is a tomboy. She doesn't prefer to enjoy girly outfits, appearance. Oops, that's gone. Sorry. Let me start again. She doesn't prefer to enjoy girly outfit, appearances or hobbies. As a young Muslim girl, I have to help her realise that it doesn't matter how she dresses, as long as she dresses respectfully. I also support her hobbies in wrestling and playing with action Marvel figures. Excellent programme, by the way. Love the young panel and their views in contributing to this discussion. Well done, mashallah. So again, well done, guys. My daughter also sees me go to work full-time, and her dad works from home and does the school run against social gender norms. It's important my daughter sees that being represented in real day life in order to influence change in perception, inshallah. Wow. Well, that's a very unique situation. And actually, thank you for sharing that, because I think, yeah, it's right. There are certain hobbies and actually interests that young children particularly might, reject these sort of gender norms from the very beginning. And actually, what we're doing is restricting them in terms of their development to explore their true self and their true nature. Another comment, hi, I think stereotypes that men play sports and physical things have also improved in our lives. For example, a lot more women play sports nowadays. I think that's a great place to start for parents to get their children into sports. My name is Carlos Zanes. Thank you so much for messaging in, actually. Yeah, you're right. We have progressed leaps and bounds, but actually it's through these conversations that we are getting to a place where we want to be and allowing men and women equal opportunities. That's the key point, right? We need to have equal opportunities. Sana, what are your views on this? So we are moving in the right direction. Do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like one of the major ones in terms of sports was the women's football league, and when like big mainstream streaming like Sky Sports, Virgin Media, stuff like that actually started to stream them more.
Yeah.
Even though I already know not a lot of people watch it, that's a given. But I feel like that's something that can be improved on.
Brilliant. So thank you for those comments. Really useful to hear what's happening in real life and actually how some of these things are much more progressive, recognising that we don't have to stick to these gender norms. I'm going to go back to what Galeem said about gender roles. And that there is some distinct roles. He made a point about Khadija radhiyallahu anha, who was a very successful businesswoman, and she, again, highlighting that it doesn't have to always be the man. So, Bashira, then, can you think, what's your understanding of gender roles in Islam?
Again, like Galeem said, there are different roles, but again, they're very equal in that sense. But I do feel like a lot of cultural aspects undermine the Islamic gender roles.
Okay, give me an example.
So for example, Khadija radhiyallahu anha, she was a businesswoman, and she made the most income. But then when you look at nowadays, I've had this discussion before with a few boys who are my age, and I was like, oh, if your wife was earning a lot more than you, would you want her to still carry on doing what she was doing, or would you take on the role of looking after your kids, doing the school and so that kind of thing? And I remember that this one boy, he was like, no, and I was like, why? And he was like, because that's my job.
Wow.
I was like,
okay.
It's not it's a very cultural thing as well. At the end of the day, they're like, oh, when you get married, how it's been touched on before, when you get married, the woman stays at home, she does all the housework, she picks up the kids from school and all this kind of stuff. And I feel like this very much undermines the Islamic gender roles.
Right, okay. And Amira's nodding in the studio. I think she really agrees with what you're saying. Mariam, on that note then, how easy is it for us, for you, for anyone to separate cultural norms and expectations from our Islamic tradition?
I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think it's that easy, just because there are so many different expectations and you just don't know where they're coming from. But of course, once you start reading hadiths and kitabs and stuff, you'll understand that men and women are not oppressed, and men and women are actually really equal. And in our households, men and women should be able to share equal jobs that around the house and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think slowly over time, these we'll be able to distinguish the difference between cultural and Islamic roles.
Yeah. And actually, there is something in this. You can read the Islamic textbooks and listen to lectures and learn about the lives of the prophets, the companions of the prophets, and actually his family members. And learn about how involved they were, in all areas of their lives, whether they were a man or a woman, whether that's going out to war or whether that's sort of staying at home and, supporting the family infrastructure. So you can read these things, listen to lectures, and then you can come home and see it's very, very different, right? Now, just talking generally then, Amira, are you aware of how, young people might struggle with this, where they recognize that there's something more from an Islamic point of view, but maybe feel limited in their ability to challenge the cultural norms that they're presented with?
Yeah, it is. It's exactly that. It's the cultural part of it. The separating the Islamic view of women to the cultural view of women, it's two completely different things. Like, you come home and you're told that women act X, Y, and Z, but that's not because of our Islamic duty. That's because of our cultural duty to have a family and how we're expected culturally to act. And I think that as time goes on, that is being diluted. And I think I see a lot more that even in my household, that my dad or my brother will do things around the house and help out. Like, it's not just expected for me, my sister, and my mum to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's also because of how my parents have how my parents have raised us and how they've changed our attitude towards those cultural norms, as I say. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so sticking on the topic of cultural norms then. So now I'm going to ask you a question about education and what are the expectations for when it comes to education? When it comes to education, what are the expectations for boys and girls in the home environment, generally speaking? So you don't have to reflect on your personal experiences, but generally speaking, what are the conversations looking like when young people are thinking about what they're going to do with their lives?
Generally, I think in terms of like career, jobs, school, it's all men and boys seem to take subjects that are more mathsy, more sciencey, things like that, to do with finance, banking, whereas girls take subjects like sociology or like Kaleem said, and being a nurse and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, again, touching on what Kaleem said, it's more maternal jobs that women and maternal subjects that girls pick.
Okay. Amira, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that what I was saying about the boys' subjects and the girls' subjects, I think there's also a barrier to entries for women in those subjects. For example, in the financial world, you want to work your way through the ranks, but employers will look at you and think, right, has she just got married? Does she look like she's within childbearing age? Okay, do I really want to go through X amount of years of maternity pay with her when she's going to be doing no work? Yeah. As a businessman, that's not going to do anything good for me in my job. So I think a lot to do with that is the stereotype of women and their age and what they're expected again to do.
Yeah, no, that's really, I mean, I've got a personal experience where I was asked that question, oh, are you going to have any more children? But, and we know that that's illegal. You can't do that. It's wrong. But sometimes these things happen. Actually, what we realise is that women still earn less than men in virtually every single industry because of gender stereotyping and also wage discrimination. It's very real. And, that's why these sort of early experiences can really impact you later on in life. From a faith point of view, so we've talked about sort of general mainstream stereotypes, okay? And then we've touched on how Islam views men and women. Okay, the general thing being that men and women are equal, but there are some distinct roles. But with that said, there's no limitations that a woman must and only do one thing and a man must and only do another thing. Under Islamic laws, we know that women have the right to buy and sell property. They can run a business. They can demand their dowry at any point in their marriage. In fact, marriage gives women a lot of rights. If they want to work, the money is their own. But, they can vote and take part in all aspects of politics and society. There's so much there. But when we look at what's happening in the modern world, it doesn't seem to match. So what was happening sort of 1,400 years ago and what's happening now, it's almost like back then, they were well ahead of the game, right? Mariam, do you have any thoughts on this?
Not really, to be honest. I feel like you've kind of gone through quite a lot of things. I think gradually people are starting to see, now that obviously there's been so many like protests and like so many different things that have been going on in the media, that women are finally starting to be taken seriously, so that they don't have to conform to the roles and to the stereotypes that they just have to have kids and just be housewives. They can go out and be businesswomen and make their own kind of way of life, whatever it is that they want to do.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So Kaleem then, when you're thinking about Islamic gender roles, like you said, women have the ability to do a lot more than sometimes what the modern day stereotypes sort of describe them to be doing. And we've got some good examples of that. But then from a male point of view, when you look at some of the examples that, for example, just with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you read about his life and you read about how involved he is, and then how do you make that a reality in your own life with your peer groups, for example, who maybe don't see it in this way? I don't know.
Okay, so I think a big one is the language that we use. So often sexist terms like firemen are used, whereas instead we can use like things like firefighters, because it's not just men who are firefighters.
Yeah.
And also in terms of madrasa as well, we can learn more stories about women in Islam and their successes.
Yeah. That's a really good point, actually. And I think, you know, there is more opportunities to learn about some really key women figures, but equally the men. You know, there's a lot there to talk about in terms of how men at the time of the Prophet ﷺ didn't restrict or limit themselves to, you know, participate in household chores or support with caring for children. And actually, that's another big stereotype, isn't it? That women should be the primary caregivers, right?
Yeah.
And actually, from an Islamic point of view, women have a nature, that the mothering nature, I guess. And of course, they're going to be given a lot more. You know, from a very early age, the child is dependent on the mother in so many ways. But with that said, the father equally has a responsibility to share the childcare responsibilities, right? So yeah, really interesting actually, because I think sometimes we don't realise that we've got a really good example in front of us. Our faith is liberating, you know, and whilst we are bombarded with messages about gender stereotypes from a whole load of sources, we've discussed them, the media being the biggest one, we realise that actually it doesn't matter if a woman is veiled or if a woman is wearing a hijab, she really is a powerful woman. You know, we've got good examples that they're perfectly capable of engaging in sort of very intellectual conversations. You know, they can be competent in debating, they can run businesses, and that takes a lot of skill. At the same time, a woman is also capable of, you know, looking after her children and bringing up, educated kids for the future generations. Same thing with guys, you know, of course, they're strong, they're physically much more able to do a whole load of other things, and that's why we probably ask them to do the DIY, because we might not even be strong enough to lift a ladder sometimes, right? But if they get so stuck into that physical side of stuff that, you know, you have to go to the gym, you have to look a certain way, you've got to be pumped all the time, they're neglecting other things that they may well be capable of doing. So just to round off then, we've got like the last few minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to describe a person, okay? And I just want you to think about who that might be. In the first instance, you might think, is that a guy, or is it a male, or is it a female? But then if you can think of the person, that's great. And I want you to think about Islamic role models, essentially, okay? So let's go to Bashira. Bashira, listen carefully. This person saw the martyrdom of their loved ones before their eyes and stood firm, confident and brave in front of the oppressor and delivered a powerful speech which shook the people listening. Who do you think that is?
I don't know.
Do you think it's a woman or a man?
I feel like it could be a woman.
Okay. It's only because the conversation's kind of going that way, right? But yeah, you're right. I told you it was going to be an easy task, and that's why I didn't give you guys this in advance. But yeah, it's a woman, and we're talking about Zainab, who is the daughter of Ali radiallahu anhu, and she accompanied her brother when they went to the Battle of Karbala. She witnessed some brutal murders, but yet she stood and looked at her oppressor in the eye and delivered a really powerful sermon, literally saying, hold on, don't talk about me through other people, talk to me directly. That is a strong, powerful woman who is completely throwing out the window all these gender stereotypes that we see in the modern world. Okay, the next one. Have we got any volunteers?
I'll try.
Go on then, okay. Okay, this person did great charitable acts in private. Their gender did not determine the good acts they carried out, and according to a narration, used to visit a blind elderly woman and help with her household chores.
I think that is a man.
Okay, any idea who it might be?
I really don't want to get it wrong.
It's okay, no, it's fine. You can guess, it's not a problem.
No, I'm not gonna try. I'm going to try.
Okay, I'm not going to push you, but I'll give you the answer. It's Abu Bakr Siddiq, radiallahu anhu. And yeah, he used to visit a blind woman and help with her household chores. He kept it all private. In fact, she didn't even know he was visiting. But, you know, just because he's a man, it didn't mean that, oh, I'll get a woman to go there and, you know, help out, whatever. He did it. It didn't matter whether he was a male. Okay, the last one then, Dahir. No, sorry, actually, I've got a couple more depending on time. Dahir, okay, this one. Are you ready?
Yep.
This person is so easy, by the way, because we've discussed it. This person was a successful business person and advocated for the rights of equality between genders in a time when there were very strong views on which gender had the most authority.
It was the Prophet's wife.
Spot on. Yeah, that was Khadija radiallahu anha. And yeah, she was a businesswoman and actually stood against many of the unjust practices at the time where, you know, we know that it was a very oppressive Arab culture, particularly for women. And again, you know, really another really powerful example that a lot of women reflect on when they recognize actually we can be a lot more than sometimes what we tell ourselves. Okay, last one then, Kaleem. This person lived the example which dismisses all modern-day stereotypes. This person was known to support the runnings of a household in a number of ways, and narrations include reports of cooking, cleaning, supporting with childcare, mending sandals and stitching garments. Do you know who this is?
No, I have no clue.
Anyone else?
No.
No?
I might be wrong, but is it the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Bingo. Spot on. That is it. Yeah. The best example, not just for men, but also for women. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, is the perfect example of how to be a husband, how to be a friend, how to be a father, you know, how to maintain ties of brotherhood, but also how he treated women. You know, he didn't make women feel bad for asking questions. In fact, you know, he raised their station and said, look, this is a beautiful question from a woman, you know, and addressed her directly, recognizing and teaching others around him. Let's not create this hierarchy of man above woman. We're all equal in the eyes of Allah. And I think this is it. It's a beautiful place to end, I think. If you haven't learnt about the life of the Prophet ﷺ and how he really has, you know, if he was alive today, he'd be looking around us and saying, this is not how we live. You know, we shouldn't be adhering to the gender stereotypes that the modern world is throwing at us. If we go back to our roots, our traditional Islam, and really celebrate some of the successes, you know, knowing that women were going to battlefields, you know, they were, you know, really intellectual, they were scholars, you know, Aisha radiallahu anha, you know, she was amazingly powerful in that way, and taught men around her. In the same way, men, again, you know, Prophet ﷺ was probably the one person that cried the most. You know, we know this as a fact, mashallah. And so, you know, going back to what Dahi said, we shouldn't be ashamed of men crying. That's okay. The Prophet ﷺ done this. You know, he's like the best of the best. And so I think I want to end there. I think that's a really good point to end on. We are all equal in the eyes of Allah, but a lot of modern day sort of stereotypes kind of tell us otherwise, and we shouldn't submit to those. We should be strong and recognize our identity as Muslims first, and then obviously our gender comes into play, recognizing what is true to our nature, and really trying to live the best example, the best version of ourselves. One last comment. Salams, culturally, there is an expectation for men. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Like many things, people tend to mix up religion and culture. In Islam, gender roles are equal. Most of the negative stuff comes from culture. Absolutely. You know, there is a space for culture within Islam, but what we do recognize is that some things are very toxic. And we know that toxic masculinity, that's another thing, you know, very, very common in some circles. But equally, you know, we just need to go back to the roots, right? Amira, any sort of final thoughts on that point?
No, I think the main takeaway is we just need to know how to separate culture from Islam and what we're taught, and from what we're shown by the people before us as well. And I think that's a really good takeaway.
Yeah, I think being a woman is more than just sort of being slim and making sure you look okay.
No, it's powerful.
Exactly.
It's powerful.
And we've got some really strong examples that back that up. Dahir, have you got any final thoughts on that? We've just got a minute and I just would love to hear from you.
Now I'm pretty much done, to be honest.
Brilliant.
The only thing I'd probably say is that men and women are equal.
Are equal, did you say, or aren't?
Are equal. Oh, I wouldn't go through this whole program and say aren't equal.
I was going to say, that would have been a shocker.
Could you imagine I said that?
Yeah, men and women are equal. So yeah, myth or reality, I guess that's the key question. So now, what do you think?
Reality, for sure. It's something people live through every day with their own experiences. So yeah, reality.
Yeah. So I think that's the key point. If we try and live a stronger example of what we are as women and men, then we can definitely achieve great things. I want to thank everyone for listening to our show. Inshallah, we'll be back next week for our last one. Please tune in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.